How could a merchant in the 7th century Arabian desert, a man who couldn't read or write, recite stunningly accurate details about how a human develops in the womb? I mean, details that science would take another 1,000 years to confirm. How is that even possible?
Now this is where it gets really interesting. That quote you see, that's not from a theologian or a historian. That's from Professor Keith Moore, a world-renowned non-Muslim scientist who wrote the textbook on embryology that medical students use. His conclusion? Well, that's what takes this from just a curiosity into a serious scientific question.
So let's get right into it. Let's look at the specific verses about the embryo that completely blew Professor Moore's mind and honestly shocked the wider scientific community. Okay, so here's the verse itself, revealed way back around 610 CE. The claim is that right here, in these few lines, is a precise step-by-step roadmap of human development. Just think about it for a second. At that time, there were no microscopes, no ultrasounds. The womb was a complete and total black box.
So the really crucial thing here is the sequence. It's not just a random list of words. The text describes a very specific process. It starts with a sperm drop, which turns into a clinging, leech-like clot, then a chewed lump, and from that lump, bones are formed, and only then are those bones covered with flesh. So let's see how that compares to what we know today.
And this right here is one of the most powerful points in the whole argument. You see, the top scientific theory at the time came from the famous Greek physician Galen. He taught that bones and flesh just kind of form at the same time. But this text comes along and seems to directly correct him, saying, nope, it's a sequence. Bones first, then flesh. And guess what? Modern embryology has proven that's exactly right. The skeleton forms, and then the muscles, the flesh, develop around it.
Okay, but the story doesn't stop in the womb. Let's build on this with 2 more claims, these about human biology, details that were just flat out impossible to know without modern medicine.
This table just lays it out so clearly. Back in the 7th century, the idea was that pain was just a general feeling in the body. But a verse talking about the afterlife mentions replacing burned skin specifically so the pain can continue, which lines up perfectly with our modern discovery that pain receptors are concentrated in the skin. It's the same thing with identity. A verse about resurrection specifically mentions being able to recreate a person's fingerprints, a subtle nod to the unique identity held within them, a fact we didn't scientifically nail down until the late 1800s. All right, now let's shift gears. We're going to pull way back from the microscopic world inside us, all the way out to the cosmos. And we're going to talk about a really fascinating claim about where one of our most important metals comes from, iron. Now you have to pay super close attention to the specific words used here. The verse doesn't say, we created iron in the earth. It says, we sent down iron. The Arabic word used, anzalna, means a literal descent from above. It's the same word used for rain being sent down.
And here is the absolutely stunning part. In the 20th century, astrophysicists figured out that iron literally cannot be created on our planet. The energy needed is just too immense, way more than our own sun can produce. Every single bit of iron on Earth was forged in the heart of giant exploding stars, supernovas, and then scattered across space, eventually becoming part of the dust cloud that formed our planet. So every piece of iron we use was, quite literally, sent down from the sky.
Next up, we are diving deep, literally. We're going to look at a description of a really strange phenomenon hidden in the world's oceans, something that would have been totally invisible 1,400 years ago. So the text talks about a barrier between 2 large bodies of water that stops them from mixing. Now, to the naked eye, that just sounds impossible, right? I mean, water is water. You pour it together, it mixes, end of story. But then modern oceanography comes along and discovers this exact thing. It's called a pycnocline. It's a real, invisible barrier caused by differences in density, saltiness, and temperature. You can actually see it where a big freshwater river meets the salty ocean, or where seas like the Atlantic and Mediterranean meet. They don't mix right away. They flow side by side for miles. It's wild. Of course, when you make claims this big, you're going to get some serious skepticism, and that's totally fair. So let's take a good look at the main counterarguments and what proponents say in response. So the first and biggest criticism is this. Isn't this all just vague, poetic language? Aren't people just looking back with 21st century eyes and forcing these modern scientific ideas onto ancient, ambiguous words?
Well, proponents push back on that, and they push back hard. They argue that the embryology sequence, clot to lump to bones, then flesh, isn't vague at all. That's a specific, ordered process. They point to the precise term for iron being sent down. And they bring up the fact that outside, non-Muslim experts like Professor Moore looked at this and said, wow, that's scientifically compelling, not that's vague poetry.
Okay, so the next logical question is, fine, maybe it's not vague, but could it have just been copied? Maybe this information was just borrowed from existing sources, like the writings of the ancient Greeks. Now, the counter-argument here is fascinating. It says that the text didn't just not copy the Greeks, it actively corrected them. We already saw how Galen's theory about bones and flesh was wrong, and the sequence in the Quran is right. The argument is, if you're just plagiarizing something, why on earth would you correct your source with information that won't be proven right for more than 1,000 years? It's a huge question.
So after all that, the evidence, the skepticism, the back and forth, we end with one final verse. And proponents claim this is one that for centuries was completely misunderstood, but that science is only now, in our lifetime, finally starting to catch up to.
This verse describes human creation as coming from a fluid that emerges from between the backbone and the ribs. And to be honest, for a very, very long time, a lot of people pointed to this as a potential scientific mistake. It just didn't seem to make sense.
You see, the most obvious interpretation was that it was talking about the origin of sperm in an adult male. And anatomically, that's just not accurate. So for a long time, many considered it to be metaphorical, or maybe just plain incorrect.
But what if the verse isn't talking about an adult man at all? What if it's describing the very, very beginning of our reproductive ability, deep inside the womb? Because, get this, research in the early 2000s revealed that during our own development as embryos, the first cells that will eventually become sperm and eggs, they actually originate in an area right between where the backbone and ribs will form, before they migrate to their final home.
And this just leaves us with one last mind-bending thought. Could this verse, misunderstood for 14 centuries, actually be describing a microscopic detail about our own creation, deep inside the embryo, a process so hidden, so fundamental, that humanity has only just now invented the technology powerful enough to see it?